Welcome back. We're reading 450 from Paddington by Agatha Christie, Chapter 7. We better have the yard in on it. Is that what you think, Bacon? The chief constable looked inquiringly at Inspector Bacon. The inspector was a big, solid man. His expression was that of one utterly disgusted with humanity. The woman wasn't a local, sir, he said. There's some reason to believe, from her underclothing, that she might have been a foreigner. Of course, added Inspector Bacon hastily, I'm not letting on about that yet awhile. We're keeping it up our sleeves until after the inquest. The chief constable nodded. The inquest will be purely formal, I suppose? Yes, sir. I've seen the coroner. And it's fixed for when? Tomorrow. I understand the other members of the Crackenthorpe family will be here for it. There's just a chance one of them might be able to identify her. They'll all be here. He consulted a list he held in his hand. Harold Crackenthorpe, he's something in the city, quite an important figure, I understand. Alfred, don't quite know what he does. Cedric, that's the one who lives abroad, paints. The inspector invested the word with its full quota of sinister significance. The chief constable smiled into his mustache. No reason, is there, to believe the Crackenthorpe family are connected with the crime in any way? He asked. Not apart from the fact that the body was found on the premises, said Inspector Bacon. And, of course, it's just possible that this artist member of the family might be able to identify her. What beats me is this extraordinary rigmarole about the train. Ah, yes. You've been to see the old lady? He glanced at the memorandum lying on his desk. Miss Marple? Yes, sir, and she's quite set and definite about the whole thing. Whether she's barmy or not, I don't know, but she sticks to her story, about what her friends saw and all the rest of it. As far as all that goes, I dare say it's just make-believe. Some sort of old thing old ladies do to make up, like seeing flying saucers at the bottom of the garden and Russian agents in the lending library. But it seems quite clear that she did engage this young woman, the lady help, and told her to look for a body, which the girl did. And found one, observed the chief constable. Well, it's all a very remarkable story. Marple, Miss Jane Marple. The name seems familiar somehow. Anyway, I'll get on to the yard. I think you're right about its not being a local case, though we don't advertise the fact just yet. For the moment, we'll tell the press as little as possible. The inquest was a purely formal affair. No one came forward to identify the dead woman. Lucy was called to give evidence of finding the body, and medical evidence was given as to the cause of death, strangulation. The proceedings were then adjourned. It was a cold, blustery day when the Crackenthorpe family came out of the hall where the inquest had been held. There were 5 of them all told: Emma, Cedric, Harold, Alfred, and Brian Eastley, the husband of the dead daughter Edith. There was also Mr. Wimborne, the senior partner of the firm of solicitors who dealt with the Crackenthorpes' legal affairs. He had come down specially from London at great inconvenience to attend the inquest. They all stood for a moment on the pavement shivering. Quite a crowd had assembled. The piquant details of the body in the sarcophagus had been fully reported in both the London and the local press. A murmur went round. That's them! Emma said sharply, Let's get away. The big hired Daimler drew up to the curb. Emma got in and motioned to Lucy. Mr. Wimborne, Cedric, and Harold followed. Brian Eastley said, I'll take Alfred with me in my little bus. The chauffeur shut the door, and the Daimler prepared to roll away. Oh, stop! Cried Emma. There are the boys! The boys, in spite of a grieved protest, had been left behind at Rutherford Hall, but they now appeared grinning from ear to ear. We came on our bicycles, said Stoddard West. The policeman was very kind and let us in at the back of the hall. I hope you don't mind, Miss Crackenthorpe, he added politely. She doesn't mind, said Cedric, answering for his sister. You're only young once. Your first inquest, I expect? It was rather disappointing, said Alexander. All over so soon. We can't stay here talking, said Harold irritably. There's quite a crowd, and all those men with cameras. At a sign from him, the chauffeur pulled away from the curb. The boys waved cheerfully. All over so soon, said Cedric. That's what they think, the young innocents. It's just beginning." "It's all very unfortunate, most unfortunate," said Harold. "I suppose—" He looked at Mr. Wimborne, who compressed his thin lips and shook his head with distaste. "I hope," he said, "that the whole matter will soon be cleared up satisfactorily. The police are very efficient. However, the whole thing, as Harold says, has been most unfortunate." He looked, as he spoke, at Lucy, and there was distinct disapproval in his glance. If it had not been for this young woman, his eyes seemed to say, poking about where she had no business to be, none of this would have happened. This sentiment, or one closely resembling it, was voiced by Harold Crackenthorpe. "By the way, Miss Islesborough, just what made you go looking in that sarcophagus?" Lucy had already wondered just when this thought would occur to one of the family. She had known that the police would ask it first thing. What surprised her was that it seemed to have occurred to no one else until this moment. Cedric, Emma, Harold, and Mr. Wimborne all looked at her. Her reply, for what it was worth, had naturally been prepared for some time. "Really," she said in a hesitating voice, "I hardly know. I did feel that the whole place needed a thorough cleaning out, and there was," she hesitated, "a very peculiar and disagreeable smell." She had counted accurately on the immediate shrinking of everyone from the unpleasantness of this idea. Mr. Wimborne murmured, "Yes, yes, of course." About 3 weeks, the police surgeon said, "I think, we must all try and not let our minds dwell on this thing." He smiled encouragingly at Emma, who had turned very pale. "Remember," he said, "this wretched young woman was nothing to do with any of us." "Ah, but you can't be so sure of that, can you?" said Cedric. Lucy Islesborough looked at him with some interest. She had already been intrigued by the rather startling differences between the three brothers. Cedric was a big man with a weather-beaten, rugged face, unkempt dark hair, and a jocund manner. He had arrived from the airport unshaven, and though he had shaved in preparation for the inquest, he was still wearing the clothes in which he had arrived and which seemed to be the only ones he had. Old gray flannel trousers and a patched and rather threadbare baggy jacket. He looked the stage bohemian to the life and proud of it. His brother Harold, on the contrary, was the perfect picture of a city gentleman and a director of important companies. He was tall, with a neat, erect carriage, and dark hair going slightly bald on the temples. A small black mustache, and was impeccably dressed in a dark, well-cut suit and a pearl gray tie. He looked what he was, a shrewd and successful businessman. He now said stiffly, "Really, Cedric, that seems a most uncalled-for remark." "Don't see why. She was in our barn, after all. What did she come here for?" Mr. Wimborne coughed and said, "Possibly some assignation? I understand that it was a matter of local knowledge that the key was kept outside on a nail." His tone indicated outrage at the carelessness of such procedure. So clearly marked was this that Emma spoke apologetically. "It started during the war for the air raid wardens. There was a little spirit stove, and they made themselves hot cocoa. And afterwards, since there was really nothing there anybody could have wanted to take, we went on leaving the key hanging up. It was convenient for the Women's Institute people, and we'd kept it in the house. It might have been awkward when there was no one at home to give it to them when they wanted to get to the place nearby. With only daily women and no resident servants—" Her voice trailed away. She had spoken mechanically, giving a wordy explanation without interest, as though her mind were elsewhere. Cedric gave her a quick, puzzled glance. "You're worried, sis. What's up?" Harold spoke with exasperation. "Really, Cedric, can you ask?" "Yes, I do ask. Granted, a strange young woman has got herself killed in the barn at Rutherford Hall. Sounds like a Victorian melodrama. And granted, it gave Emma a shock at the time, but Emma's always been a sensible girl. I don't see why she goes on being worried now. Dash it, one gets used to everything." "Murder takes a little more getting used to by some people than it may in your case," said Harold acidly. I dare say murders are to a penny in Majorca and Ibiza, not Majorca. It's the same thing. Not at all. It's quite a different island. Harold went on talking. My point is that though murder may be an everyday commonplace to you, living among hot blooded Latin people, nevertheless in England we take such things seriously. He added with increasing irritation, and really, Cedric, to appear at a public inquest in those clothes. What's wrong with my clothes? They're comfortable. They're unsuitable. Well, anyway, they're the only clothes I've got with me. I didn't pack my wardrobe trunk when I came rushing home to stand in with the family over this business. I'm a painter, and painters like to be comfortable in their clothes. So you're still trying to paint? Look here, Harold, when you say trying to paint, Mr. Wimborne cleared his throat in an authoritative manner. This discussion is unprofitable, he said reprovingly. I hope, my dear Emma, that you will tell me if there is any further way in which I can be of service to you before I return to town. The reproof had its effect. Emma Crackenthorpe said quickly, It was most kind of you to come down. Not at all. It was advisable that someone should be at the inquest to watch the proceedings on behalf of the family. I've arranged for an interview with the inspector at the house. I have no doubt that, distressing as all this has been, the situation will soon be clarified. In my own mind, there seems little doubt as to what occurred. As Emma has told us, the key of the long barn was known locally to hang outside the door. It seems highly probable that the place was used in the winter months as a place of assignation by local couples. No doubt there was a quarrel, and some young man lost control of himself. Horrified at what he had done, his eye lit on the sarcophagus, and he realized that it would make an excellent place of concealment. Lucy thought to herself, Yes, it sounds most plausible. That's just what one might think. Cedric said, You say a local couple, but nobody's been able to identify the girl locally. It's early days yet. No doubt we shall get an identification before long. And it is possible, of course, that the man in question was a local resident, but that the girl came from elsewhere, perhaps from some other part of Brackhampton. Brackhampton's a big place. It's grown enormously in the last 20 years. If I were a girl coming to meet my young man, I'd not stand for being taken to a freezing cold barn miles from anywhere, Cedric objected. I'd stand for a nice bit of cuddle in the cinema. Wouldn't you, Miss Islesborough? Do we need to go into all this? Harold demanded plaintively. And with the voicing of the question, the car drew up before the front door of Rutherford Hall, and they all got out. All right, that's the end of Chapter 7. Join me soon for Chapter 8. And please don't forget to hit subscribe on my channel. You can also go back to my homepage and see all the different playlists, which are the different books that I've read and all the chapters inside. Thanks so much, everyone. See you next time. Bye.